Vanessa stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan penthouse, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars below her empire stretching across 3 continents. Yet tonight, it all felt hollow and cold. The crystal champagne flute in her hand trembled slightly as she replayed the conversation she had overheard just hours ago in the executive boardroom at Sterling Industries, her own company, the one she had built from the ground with her brilliant mind and relentless determination. Jonathan, her husband of 7 years, had been on a call, speaking in hushed tones that carried through the ventilation system about moving assets, about restructuring ownership, about someone named Samantha who apparently deserved more than just his attention, but also a piece of what Vanessa had created. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who appeared composed, elegant in her black designer dress, with perfectly styled auburn hair cascading over her shoulders. But inside, a storm was brewing, one that threatened to shatter the careful facade she had maintained for so long. The penthouse door opened and Jonathan walked in, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, his tie loosened in that way he thought made him look relaxed and approachable. To her, it now looked like the costume of a man playing a role. "Darling," Jonathan called out, his voice carrying that false warmth she now recognized so clearly. "I didn't expect you home so early." Vanessa turned slowly, placing the champagne flute on the marble table beside her with deliberate precision. Her smile was radiant, practiced, perfected over years of high-stakes business negotiations. "I finished my meetings ahead of schedule," she replied smoothly, her green eyes studying every micro-expression on his face. "Sometimes, efficiency is its own reward, wouldn't you agree?" Jonathan loosened his collar further, avoiding her penetrating gaze as he moved toward the bar to pour himself a scotch. Of course. You always were the most efficient person I know." The compliment that once might have pleased her now sounded like an insult wrapped in admiration, as if efficiency was all she was good for, as if the passion they once shared had been reduced to quarterly reports and profit margins. "Tell me about your day," she said, settling onto the leather sofa, her posture relaxed, but her mind sharp and calculating. "Did anything interesting happen at the office?" "Nothing unusual," Jonathan replied too quickly, his hand gripping the crystal glass tighter than necessary. "Just the regular board preparations for next month's investor meeting." Vanessa nodded slowly, her smile never wavering, even as her heart hardened into something resembling steel. She had built an empire by reading people, by understanding their motivations, their weaknesses, their lies. And right now, every instinct she possessed screamed that her husband was betraying her in ways she had yet to fully uncover. Tomorrow, she would begin her investigation. Tonight, she would play the role of the trusting wife one final time, because Vanessa Sterling hadn't become a billionaire by acting impulsively. She had done it by planning strategically, by turning every disadvantage into an opportunity, by ensuring that when she struck, her enemies never saw it coming.
3 days later, Vanessa sat in her private office on the 42nd floor, reviewing documents that her head of security, Marcus, had discreetly gathered for her, and what she discovered made her blood run cold with calculated fury. Samantha Reed, 28 years old, former junior analyst at Sterling Industries, now apparently Jonathan's executive assistant, a position Vanessa hadn't even known existed until yesterday. The photographs spread across her mahogany desk told a story of deception that went far deeper than a simple affair. Dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to the Hamptons, and most damning of all, meetings with several board members at Sterling Industries, her board members. Vanessa picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. Ethan Cole answered on the second ring, his deep voice warm with surprise. "Vanessa, I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about your oldest friend and business partner." "Never," she replied, allowing genuine affection to seep into her voice. "I need you, Ethan. Can you come to my private office within the hour? It's urgent." 15 minutes later, Ethan walked through her door, his tall, athletic frame filling the doorway, his dark eyes immediately concerned when he saw her expression. He had been her partner since the beginning, the one person who believed in her vision when everyone else called her crazy for leaving her father's company to build her own. "What's wrong?" he asked, closing the door behind him and crossing to her desk in 3 long strides. Vanessa handed him the folder without a word, watching as he flipped through the contents, his jaw tightening with each page, his hands gripping the documents until his knuckles turned white. That son of a... Ethan stopped himself, his eyes meeting hers, filled with protective anger. How long has this been going on? At least 18 months, based on what Marcus uncovered. Vanessa stood and walked to the window, her arms crossed. But it's not just the affair, Ethan. Look at page 12. He turned to the financial documents, and his expression darkened. They're planning a hostile takeover, using shell companies and proxy votes to gain controlling interests in Sterling Industries? Vanessa nodded, her reflection in the glass showing a woman transformed from hurt wife to warrior queen. Jonathan and Samantha have been courting board members, promising them higher dividends and executive bonuses if they vote to restructure the company, with Jonathan as CEO and me as a mere figurehead. Over my dead body, Ethan said flatly, setting the folder down with controlled force. What do you need from me? Vanessa turned to face him, and for the first time in 3 days, she smiled genuinely. I need you to help me destroy them. Professionally, of course. We take back every vote they think they have secured. We remind the board why Sterling Industries became the powerhouse it is today, because of my vision, my leadership, my relentless drive. Ethan moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring in a way that made her realize how alone she had felt in her marriage. And personally? Personally, Vanessa said, her voice dropping to something almost vulnerable, I need someone I can trust, someone who won't betray me for a younger woman or a bigger piece of my empire. You have always had that, Ethan said softly, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm, his fingers warm against her skin. Vanessa, I've stood beside you for 10 years, and I will stand beside you for 10,000 more if you'll let me. The air between them shifted, charged with something that had always been there, simmering beneath the surface of professional partnership and deep friendship, but never acknowledged, never acted upon. Thank you, she whispered, her hand covering his, for everything. Ethan's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. We start tomorrow with the board meetings, but tonight, let me take you to dinner. Not as your business partner, but as someone who cares about you, who wants to remind you what it's like to be valued for more than your company or your money. Vanessa felt something crack in her carefully constructed armor, a small fissure that let in light and warmth, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, betrayal could lead to something better, something real. All right, she agreed, her smile genuine for the first time in days. Let's start taking back my life.
The Sterling Industries boardroom gleamed with polished perfection, 16 executive chairs surrounding an oval table of Italian marble, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan that symbolized the empire Vanessa had built. She arrived early, wearing a crimson power suit that made her look like a queen ready for battle, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that showcased the diamond earrings Ethan had surprised her with yesterday, along with a note that read, "Armor for a warrior." The board members filed in, one by one, exchanging nervous glances when they saw her expression serene and confident, radiating the kind of power that reminded them exactly who had built this company from nothing. Jonathan arrived with Samantha at his side, and Vanessa felt Ethan tense beside her, his protective instincts flaring, but she placed a calming hand on his arm, her touch brief but meaningful. Samantha was beautiful in a calculated way, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her navy dress professional yet provocative, her smile smug as if she had already won. "Good morning, everyone," Vanessa began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "Thank you for attending this emergency board meeting. I know some of you were expecting a different agenda today, but I felt it was time to address some concerns about the future direction of Sterling Industries." Jonathan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Vanessa, perhaps this isn't the right time for—" "Actually, Jonathan," Vanessa interrupted, her smile widening, her eyes locked on his, "it's the perfect time. You see, I've spent the last week reviewing some very interesting financial documents. Shell companies, proxy votes, secret meetings with board members behind my back." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. She turned her gaze to Samantha, who met her eyes with false confidence. "Hello, Samantha.
I'm so glad you could join us today. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Vanessa Sterling, CEO and majority shareholder of this company. And you are? Jonathan's executive assistant, Samantha replied smoothly, her chin lifted defiantly. Vanessa laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. Beautiful and dangerous. How interesting. I don't recall approving that position. But then again, there are many things my husband hasn't told me. Isn't that right, darling? Jonathan stood abruptly, his face flushed. Vanessa, this is completely inappropriate. We can discuss this privately. Sit down, Vanessa commanded, her voice dropping to something cold and absolute. Jonathan sat. Every person in this room watched him obey her, and she saw their expressions shift, saw them remember who truly held the power here. She walked slowly around the table, her heels clicking against the marble floor, stopping directly in front of Samantha, who suddenly looked less confident. "You thought you could take my empire," Vanessa said softly. Her words meant only for Samantha, though everyone strained to hear. "You thought that sleeping with my husband and manipulating a few board members would be enough to destroy what I built." Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but Vanessa held up one perfectly manicured hand. "Let me tell you something about empires. They aren't built on betrayal or manipulation or sleeping your way to the top. They're built on vision, on sacrifice, on earning respect through undeniable excellence." She leaned closer, her smile never wavering. "And you, my dear, have none of those qualities." Vanessa straightened and addressed the board. "Marcus, please distribute the folders." Her head of security moved efficiently, placing thick folders in front of each board member, Jonathan and Samantha included. Inside, you'll find complete documentation of the attempted hostile takeover, shell company transactions, communications between Mr. Sterling and various board members promising positions and benefits in exchange for votes against my leadership, and most interesting, financial projections showing that under the proposed restructuring, Sterling Industries would lose approximately 40% of its value within 2 years. She paused, letting that sink in. Watching as board members flipped through the documents, their faces growing pale. "You are all willing to betray me for promises of short-term gains without realizing that Jonathan has no vision, no understanding of what makes this company successful. He married into power. He didn't earn it." Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. "I've worked alongside you for 7 years." "As my husband," Vanessa shot back. "Not as my equal. You attended galas, shook hands at charity events, and looked good in photographs. But you never understood the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the impossible decisions that real leadership requires." She turned back to the board, her expression softening slightly. "I built this company with many of you by my side. We took risks together, celebrated victories together, weathered storms together, and I am disappointed beyond words that some of you were willing to throw that away." Board member Charles Henderson, an older gentleman who had been with her from the beginning, cleared his throat. "Vanessa, we were told you were planning to step down, that you wanted to focus on personal matters." Vanessa smiled sadly. "And you believe that? Without asking me directly, Charles, when have I ever stepped away from a challenge?" Henderson had the grace to look ashamed. "Never." "Exactly." She moved back to her seat beside Ethan, who watched her with unmistakable pride and admiration. "So here is what happens next, Jonathan. You have until end of business today to remove your personal belongings from this building and from our home. Samantha, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you both out." "You can't do this," Jonathan sputtered, rising from his chair again, his face red with humiliation. "I can, and I am," Vanessa replied calmly. "Our prenuptial agreement, which you signed without reading thoroughly because you were so eager to marry into my fortune, states clearly that infidelity results in complete forfeiture of any claims to my assets or my company. You'll leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage. Nothing." She looked at Samantha, whose smug expression had completely crumbled. "You'll find that no reputable company in this city will hire you after today. I may not be vindictive, but I am thorough, and my reputation matters." Vanessa addressed the board one final time. "As for those of you who participated in this attempted coup, you have a choice. Resign today, with severance packages and non-disparagement agreements, or stay and prove your loyalty going forward, knowing that I will be watching everything you do." The room erupted in murmured conversations, board members looking at each other with varying degrees of shame and relief. Ethan stood beside her, his hand finding hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of support that felt like so much more. "Meeting adjourned," Vanessa said, her voice final, her smile still perfectly in place. As security escorted Jonathan and Samantha from the room, Vanessa finally allowed herself to breathe deeply, to feel the weight of betrayal lift from her shoulders, replaced by something lighter, stronger. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "You were magnificent," he murmured. Vanessa turned to him, her smile becoming genuine, warm, transforming her face from warrior queen to woman, discovering that perhaps love had been waiting patiently beside her all along. "This is just the beginning," she whispered back, her eyes holding his with promise and possibility. "The best is yet to come."
2 months had passed since the boardroom confrontation, and Sterling Industries was flourishing under Vanessa's renewed leadership. Stock prices had reached record highs, 3 new international contracts had been secured, and the board members who chose to stay had proven their loyalty through exceptional performance. Vanessa stood in her redesigned penthouse, the space transformed from the cold museum it had been with Jonathan into a warm, inviting home, filled with art she actually loved, books she wanted to read, and photographs of moments that mattered. Her parents, her early days building the company, and increasingly pictures of her with Ethan. The divorce had been finalized last week, a swift and brutal process that left Jonathan with nothing but his bruised ego and a one-way ticket back to his hometown. Samantha had disappeared from New York entirely. Rumor had it she was working as a receptionist somewhere in the Midwest, a fitting end to her imperial ambitions. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, Vanessa had invited Ethan to dinner. Not a business dinner, not a strategy session, but a real date, something she hadn't done in years, with genuine nervousness fluttering in her stomach. She checked her reflection in the mirror, wearing a flowing emerald dress that brought out her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders the way Ethan had once mentioned he loved seeing it, natural and unguarded. The doorbell rang, and her heart jumped in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding a bouquet of white roses, her favorite, though she had never explicitly told him. He had simply paid attention over the years, storing away details about her that Jonathan had never bothered to learn. "You look breathtaking," he said, his dark eyes sweeping over her with appreciation that felt respectful and heated all at once. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, smiling at his charcoal suit, perfectly tailored to his athletic frame. "Come in. I cooked." "You cooked?" Ethan stepped inside, his eyebrows raising in amused surprise. "The woman who once told me she had people for that actually cooked." Vanessa laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I had decided it was time to remember who I was before the Empire, before Jonathan, when I actually enjoyed creating something with my hands that wasn't a business proposal." They moved to the dining room, where she had set an intimate table for 2, candles flickering softly between them, and served the meal she had spent all afternoon preparing: salmon with herbs, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. As they ate, conversation flowed easily, as it always had between them, but now there was an undercurrent of awareness. Every accidental brush of fingers, every shared glance carrying weight and possibility. "Tell me something," Vanessa said as they finished dessert, her eyes studying him over the rim of her wineglass. "Why did you never say anything all these years about how you felt?" Ethan set down his fork, his expression becoming serious, thoughtful. "Because you were married, and I respect you too much to complicate your life." He paused, his hand reaching across the table to cover hers, but also because I wanted you to come to me freely. Not as a rebound, not out of hurt or revenge, but because you genuinely wanted me, wanted us. Vanessa turned her hand over beneath his, their palms pressing together, warmth spreading through her entire body. And now? Now, Ethan said softly, standing and moving around the table to stand beside her chair, his hand gently cupping her face. Now, I want to spend every day proving to you what real love looks like, what partnership means when it's built on respect, trust, and genuine admiration. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Vanessa rose to meet him, their lips touching in a kiss that felt like coming home, like finding something precious she hadn't known was missing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Vanessa rested her forehead against his. I was so focused on building an empire that I forgot to build a life, she whispered, but I want to build one now, with you. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, his heart beating steady and strong against her ear. Then let's build it together. One day at a time, no rush, no pressure, just us figuring out what makes us happy. They spent the rest of the evening on her balcony, overlooking the city she had conquered, talking about dreams beyond business, about traveling to places she had only seen through hotel windows, about children, maybe someday, about a future that wasn't defined by quarterly earnings, but by moments of joy and connection. As midnight approached, Ethan prepared to leave, though every part of Vanessa wanted him to stay, wanted to rush headlong into this new chapter. But she also understood the wisdom in his approach. They had time to build something lasting. At the door, Ethan kissed her again, this one deeper, more promising. Thank you for tonight, for trusting me with your heart. I promise I will guard it with everything I have. I know you will, Vanessa replied, her hand touching his face, gently tracing the line of his jaw. That's why I'm not afraid anymore. After he left, she stood by the window, watching the city lights, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Genuine happiness, hope for a future that included both her empire and a love worth having. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Already missing you. Sleep well, my queen. Tomorrow, we conquer the world together. Vanessa smiled, holding the phone to her heart. Tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that, she whispered to the night.
6 months later, Vanessa stood at the altar of a small private chapel in the Hamptons, surrounded by only the people who truly mattered. Her parents, who had flown in from Paris, her closest friends, and the board members, who had remained loyal through everything. She wore a simple, elegant wedding dress, ivory silk that flowed like water. No elaborate train, no excessive embellishments, just pure, understated beauty that reflected the woman she had become, someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Ethan stood waiting for her at the altar, his eyes bright with unshed tears of joy, his hand extended toward her as she walked down the aisle, alone, because she had insisted, needing no one to give her away when she had always belonged to herself. The ceremony was brief and intimate, the vows they exchanged, written by themselves, speaking not of duty or obligation, but of partnership, equality, and a love that had grown from deep friendship into something transcendent and unshakable. I promise to stand beside you, not behind you, Ethan said, his voice strong and clear, holding both her hands in his. To celebrate your victories and support you through challenges. To love you not for what you can give me, but for who you are. Brilliant, fierce, compassionate, and absolutely extraordinary. Vanessa's own vows came from the deepest part of her heart. I promise to trust you with my vulnerabilities and my strength. To build not just an empire, but a life filled with laughter, adventure, and genuine connection. To love you completely for seeing me when I was invisible, for waiting when you could have walked away, for proving that real love is worth waiting for. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause, but Vanessa heard none of it, aware only of Ethan's arms around her, his lips on hers, the feeling of rightness that filled every cell of her body. The reception was held at the beach house they had purchased together, a place that was theirs, not inherited, not built to impress, but chosen because they both loved the sound of waves and the smell of salt air and the idea of building memories in a space unmarred by past betrayals. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Vanessa and Ethan stood at the water's edge, alone for a moment, away from the celebration. "Remember when you thought your life was over?" Ethan asked softly, his arm around her waist, holding her close.
When Jonathan and Samantha nearly took everything from you? Vanessa leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, watching the waves roll in, rhythmic and eternal. I remember feeling like I had lost something irreplaceable. And now? Now I realize I didn't lose anything that mattered, she replied, turning to face him, her hands sliding up his chest to link behind his neck. I shed weight that was holding me back. I made room for something infinitely better. Sterling Industries had continued to thrive under their joint leadership, Ethan officially becoming co-CEO in a move that shocked no one who knew them. They balanced each other perfectly, her vision and drive complemented by his strategic thinking and diplomatic skills. Together, they were unstoppable. But more importantly, they had built a life outside the boardroom. Weekend getaways where phones stayed off, volunteering at youth entrepreneurship programs, teaching underprivileged kids that they too could build empires. Date nights where they cooked together and laughed and remembered that love was meant to be enjoyed, not endured. Vanessa had even reconnected with old passions she had abandoned: painting, photography, gardening, things that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with feeding her soul. 3 months ago, she had started a foundation supporting women who had survived domestic abuse and betrayal, providing them with resources, business training, and mentorship, helping them rebuild their lives and reclaim their power, just as she had done. The foundation was named Phoenix Rising, and its logo was designed by Vanessa herself, a phoenix emerging from flames, wings spread wide, ready to soar, a perfect symbol of transformation and resilience. As they returned to the reception, hand in hand, Vanessa's mother pulled her aside for a moment, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I worried about you for so many years," her mother said softly. "You were so focused on success, on proving yourself, that I feared you would never find happiness. But looking at you now with Ethan, I see my daughter truly alive for the first time in years." Vanessa embraced her mother tightly. "It took losing everything I thought I wanted to find everything I actually needed," she whispered. "Love that is real, partnership that is genuine, happiness that comes from authenticity, not achievement." Later, as she and Ethan shared their first dance, the song they had chosen playing softly, a jazz standard about second chances and new beginnings, Vanessa looked around at the faces of people who had stood by her, who had believed in her, who had proven that loyalty and love were not fairy tales, but choices people made every single day. "Thank you," she whispered against Ethan's ear as they swayed together, "for waiting, for believing, for showing me what I deserved." Ethan pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his smile tender and filled with promise. "You never needed me to show you that, Vanessa. You always deserved everything. You just needed to believe it yourself." As the night wore on, filled with laughter, toasts, and dancing under strings of lights that turned the beach house into something magical, Vanessa felt a profound sense of peace and purpose. She had built an empire, yes, but she had also built something far more valuable: a life filled with authentic connection, meaningful work, and a love that empowered rather than diminished her. Jonathan and Samantha had tried to take everything from her, but instead they had inadvertently given her the greatest gift: freedom, to discover who she really was, freedom to choose love on her own terms, freedom to create a future defined not by what she had survived, but by what she had become. As midnight approached, Ethan swept her up in his arms, carrying her toward the beach house amid cheers and laughter from their guests. "Ready to start forever, Mrs. Cole?" he asked, his eyes dancing with mischief and adoration. Vanessa kissed him deeply, passionately. "Ready to start everything," she replied. Behind them, the ocean waves continued their eternal rhythm, and above them, stars blazed in the clear night sky, bearing witness to a love that had risen from betrayal, stronger, wiser, and absolutely unbreakable. This was not an ending, Vanessa thought as they crossed the threshold together. This was the beginning of everything that mattered. And in the morning, when they woke wrapped in each other and sunlight streaming through windows overlooking the sea, they would begin again, not as wounded survivors, but as partners, equals, lovers, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that together they had already conquered the only empire that truly mattered: the empire of their own hearts.